The laughter dies before it finishes echoing. Beverly Hills Hotel, Polo Lounge, late 1940s. Cigarette smoke hangs low under amber lights caught in the slow spin of ceiling fans. Crystal glasses sweat onto white linen. A fork taps porcelain, someone coughs. And at the head of the table, J. Edgar Hoover does not blink. Clyde Tolson sits just to his right, perfectly still, hands folded, watching the table with the polite interest of a man who misses nothing. Studio executives, men who decide which faces America sees on screen, suddenly find the tablecloth fascinating. The young screenwriter is still half standing. His hand is raised mid-gesture, his mouth is slightly open. He had just finished the imitation. Not loud, not crude, just a quick mimicry of Hoover's clipped diction and tight smile. A few lines delivered in jest, echoing a comment Hoover had made minutes earlier about moral standards in the industry. The kind of impression people did at private parties, the kind that usually earned a small round of relief laughter. It had earned that. For exactly 1 second. Then Hoover looked at him. And did nothing. No smile, no frown, no movement toward anger, no theatrical display, just a quiet, deliberate stillness. The kind of stillness that carries weight. The screenwriter slowly sits down. A glass clinks against another, too loud. Someone clears their throat and says, "Another round," in a voice that sounds like it belongs to a different man. Hoover adjusts his cuff. The room understands something without it being spoken. The joke did not land, it did not bounce harmlessly into the air, it landed somewhere else. And it will not stay in this room. The Beverly Hills Hotel in the late 1940s was more than a luxury escape. It was neutral ground. Deals were made here that never saw contracts. Careers were built here before casting notices were typed. The Polo Lounge in particular was a room where powerful men preferred to believe they were relaxed. They were not relaxed tonight. Hoover was in Lowe's Angels under the polite label of friend of the industry. The FBI had long cultivated relationships with studio heads, Louis B. Mayer at MGM, Jack Warner at Warner Bros., Harry Cohn at Columbia. Publicly, it was about patriotism, anti-communism, protecting American values on screen. Privately, it was about influence. Hollywood was a factory for myth. Hoover understood myth better than anyone. He built his own carefully, impeccable suits, clean records, public morality, the image of order. He also kept files. On actors, on producers, on politicians, on rumors. Especially rumors. That was the unspoken truth sitting at the table tonight. The dinner had begun cordially, a few anecdotes about Washington, a mild story about congressional hearings. Hoover spoke in measured tones, every sentence shaped. He enjoyed being listened to. The screenwriter, young, quick-witted, recently signed to a mid-level studio contract, had been invited by a producer who liked his sharp dialogue. He was not powerful, he was promising. Promising men sometimes confuse proximity to power with safety. Earlier in the evening, Hoover had commented on the importance of discipline in public life. It was delivered gently, almost grandfatherly. A few of the executives nodded too eagerly. The screenwriter had smiled. And then, minutes later, he attempted levity. He adjusted his posture, narrowed his eyes, imitated Hoover's careful cadence. "Discipline is not optional, gentlemen." It was subtle, accurate. A room full of men who lived on impersonation recognized the craft instantly. They laughed. Even Jack Warner let out a short burst of amusement. Hoover did not. He watched. There is a difference between anger and assessment. Anger is emotional, assessment is procedural. Hoover's eyes did not flash, they calculated. He looked at the young man as if committing a detail to memory, not the joke, the man. The room felt it. Because every man at that table knew how Washington worked in 1947. The House Un-American Activities Committee hearings had begun to reshape Hollywood. Careers were already being questioned, loyalty oaths were circulating, whispers about communist sympathies could cost a contract. And the FBI sat at the center of that web. Hoover did not need to threaten anyone. He just needed to observe. The screenwriter lowers his gaze, his ears are red now. He reaches for his drink but misjudges the distance slightly, fingertips brushing glass before gripping it. Too eager. Too visible. The producer who invited him leans slightly away, a subtle shift, inches but noticeable. No one rescues him. Hoover finally speaks. Not about the joke. Not about disrespect. He turns to Louis B. Mayer and resumes a previous conversation about responsibility. His tone is smooth. The omission is surgical. The message is clear: this is not worth acknowledgement. And that is worse. Because acknowledgement would have made it small. Silence makes it permanent. Dinner continues. Steak knives glide across plates. A waiter refills wine with professional blindness. The band in the adjoining room begins a soft standard, something upbeat that now sounds inappropriate. The screenwriter attempts to re-enter conversation once, offering a comment about a recent film. No one responds directly. The producer nods faintly but does not engage. Clyde Tolson glances at Hoover once. Hoover does not return the glance, but Tolson's mouth tightens almost imperceptibly. Hoover finishes his coffee. He dabs his lips. He stands. The table rises with him. He thanks the host for the evening. He shakes hands in deliberate sequence. When he reaches the screenwriter, there is the smallest pause. Not long enough to be rude. Long enough to register. Hoover extends his hand, the screenwriter takes it. Hoover's grip is firm, controlled, cool. I do hope, Hoover says evenly, that your talents are always used wisely. The sentence is polite. It is also precise. He releases the hand. And leaves. Clyde Tolson follows. The doors close. Only then does the room exhale. But the exhale is not relief. It is recognition. One of the executives mutters, "That was unnecessary." He does not specify whether he means the joke or Hoover's sentence. The producer turns to the screenwriter slowly. You have to understand, he says carefully, voice low, this is not New York theater, this is different. Different. The word hangs. The screenwriter forces a smile, it was nothing. But everyone at the table knows something shifted. Because in Hollywood in the late 1940s, nothing involving Hoover was ever nothing. And somewhere in Washington there are cabinets. Cabinets that open quietly. The next morning nothing happens. That is the first unsettling part. The sun rises over Los Angeles with the same indifferent glow. Palm trees sway, studio gates open, secretaries sort mail. Assistants carry stacks of scripts down long corridors that smell faintly of ink and coffee. The screenwriter arrives on the lot at 9:12 a.m. He tells himself that timing matters, that routine signals confidence. No one stops him at the gate. No one looks at him differently. He almost convinces himself the night at the Beverly Hills Hotel dissolved into smoke like everything else that happened there. But power does not move loudly. It moves administratively. At 10:03 a.m. his office phone rings. Not the communal hallway phone, his. He lets it ring once too long before picking up. Hello. A pause. Then his producer's voice, calm, controlled, different. Can you come by? No explanation, no tone of anger, just a request. He walks the length of the corridor past framed film posters and closed doors. Two junior writers glance up as he passes. He imagines they know, they don't, not yet. The producer's office door is slightly ajar. He knocks. Come in. The producer doesn't offer him a seat immediately. He stands by the window instead, looking down at the lot below. Extras in period costumes wait near a soundstage entrance. It takes too long before he speaks. Washington called this morning. The screenwriter feels something tighten behind his ribs. Washington. The producer nods once. Routine check-ins, you understand. No accusation, no detail. Just atmosphere. The screenwriter chooses his words carefully. About what? The producer finally turns around. His expression is neutral, but his eyes are alert in a way they weren't yesterday. There was an observation. Observation. Not complaint, not report. Observation. The screenwriter swallows, it was a joke. The producer nods again, yes, I'm sure it was. He finally gestures to the chair, the screenwriter sits. You're talented, the producer continues, but this is a delicate moment in this town. He doesn't mention HUAC, he doesn't mention blacklists, He doesn't mention loyalty oaths that are quietly circulating through studio legal departments. He doesn't need to. The pressure of the times fills the gaps. The Bureau is concerned about influence, the producer says. Optics. Optics. As if comedy is now a matter of national security. The screenwriter leans forward. Are they saying I'm? No, the producer interrupts quickly. No one is saying anything. A beat. That's the point. Silence again. That same calculated absence from the dinner table has traveled across the country overnight and now sits inside this office. The producer exhales slowly. They simply suggested it might be wise to review. Review what? Associations. The word lands like a dropped plate. Associations. In 1947, that word can destroy a person without ever specifying a crime. The screenwriter thinks of the parties he's attended, the conversations about labor rights, the friends from New York who talked too openly about unions, the meetings in small apartments where scripts were read aloud and politics sometimes slipped into the margins. He had never joined anything. He had never signed a card. But in this climate, proximity is enough. I haven't done anything, he says quietly. The producer studies him, not with hostility, with calculation. I know that, he replies. Another pause. But knowing and proving are not the same. By early afternoon, the atmosphere shifts. Subtly. A script meeting he was scheduled to attend is postponed, no new date given. A colleague who usually shares lunch with him claims to have a call to make. The head of story development passes him in the hallway without eye contact. No accusations. Just distance. This is how isolation begins, not with confrontation but with space. That evening, at home, the screenwriter sits at his small dining table staring at a blank page in his typewriter. The clacking certainty he once relied on feels foreign. He replays Hoover's words in his mind. I do hope your talents are always used wisely. He hears them differently now. Not as advice. As assessment. In Washington, the FBI maintains what it calls security index files, lists of names categorized quietly, people considered risks in times of national emergency. The criteria are often opaque. A joke in the wrong room could become a notation. A notation could become a delay. A delay could become an end. He does not know whether his name has been written anywhere. That uncertainty is the punishment. 2 days later, he is summoned again. This time to the studio's legal department. A man in a gray suit with rimless glasses greets him politely. No hostility, just paperwork. We're updating our internal documentation, the lawyer says. Standard procedure. A sheet of paper slides across the desk. It is a loyalty statement. Carefully worded. Affirming belief in American institutions, denouncing subversive organizations, promising cooperation with inquiries. He reads it twice. His throat feels dry. Is this because of the dinner? He asks quietly. The lawyer's expression does not change. This is because of the times. He understands the difference now. The dinner was not the cause. It was the spotlight. Without that moment, he might have remained invisible, a name among hundreds of working writers. But the imitation, small, clever, fleeting, had pulled him into Hoover's direct line of sight. And once seen, he cannot be unseen. He signs. The pen scratches louder than it should. The lawyer collects the paper with professional efficiency. Thank you, he says. The screenwriter stands to leave, but the lawyer adds one more sentence. There may be follow-up inquiries. We recommend full transparency. Recommend. The language is always polite. That is how it survives. Weeks pass. He is not fired. Not officially. His contract remains intact. But assignment slow. Scripts he submits are returned with vague notes, tone adjustment needed, market concerns, perhaps revisit later. Colleagues stop sharing risky political humor in his presence. He becomes careful. Very careful. He measures every word in meetings, avoids commentary, laughs when appropriate, never too loud. He studies headlines about the Hollywood 10 and imagines how easily his name could join a list. The joke at the Beverly Hills Hotel grows in his mind. Not because of what he said. But because of who heard it, Hoover never contacts him directly. He does not need to. Influence radiates outward. Studio heads, eager to maintain favor with Washington, self-correct. They anticipate pressure before it arrives. The system protects itself. And the screenwriter begins to understand something that no one explained to him that night. Power does not retaliate emotionally. It recalibrates quietly. One evening, months later, he runs into the producer at another gathering, smaller, more cautious. The producer pulls him aside. "You're still working," he says. "That's good." The screenwriter nods. "But you're not moving forward," the producer continues gently. "It is not an insult. It is a fact. The Bureau doesn't forget," he adds, "even when it forgives." The screenwriter feels the words settle. Forgiveness in this context means survival without advancement. A ceiling he cannot see. A limit no one will confirm. And it all traces back to a single impression delivered in the wrong room. A room where silence carried more weight than laughter. He drives home that night through the quiet streets of Los Angeles, neon signs flickering against the dark. He realizes something unsettling. He no longer remembers what it felt like to speak freely. By 1950, the invitations stop. Not abruptly, just gradually enough that he can pretend it's coincidence. Premieres come and go without his name on the list. Private dinners shrink to safer circles. The producers who once introduced him as one to watch now introduce him as reliable. Reliable is not a promotion. It is containment. The country has shifted. The Red Scare is no longer background tension, it is policy. The Hollywood 10 have been sentenced. Careers have collapsed overnight. Studios cooperate more openly now. Blacklists circulate without letterhead. In this climate, visibility is dangerous. And he has already been seen. He still works. He writes dialogue for mid-budget features, crime dramas, westerns, stories about loyalty and betrayal that feel too close to autobiography. But the assignments are smaller. The ambitious scripts, the ones that used to move from desk to desk with interest, stall. One executive tells him quietly over coffee, "There are concerns." "About what?" he asks. The executive hesitates. Temperament. It is almost funny. A man once praised for sharp wit is now considered a risk because of a single imitation delivered at the wrong table. He thinks back to Hoover's face that night. The absence of reaction. The stillness. He understands it now. Anger would have made Hoover vulnerable. Anger could be quoted, criticized, dissected. Silence could not. Silence allowed others to respond for him. Studios began to self-police more aggressively. Writers were screened informally. Actors were encouraged to cooperate with committees. Even casual political conversations became suspect. The machine required no direct orders. Just awareness. And once the screenwriter became aware that Hoover was aware of him, something fundamental changed. He started editing himself before speaking. Then before writing. Eventually before thinking. In 1951, he is asked to attend a voluntary interview. Not a subpoena, not an arrest. A conversation. Two men in conservative suits sit across from him in a federal office building in Los Angeles. They are courteous, professional. They mention the dinner casually. Director Hoover remembers the evening, one says, as if recalling a pleasant reception. The word remembers carries weight. They ask about acquaintances from New York, a playwright who signed a petition, a director rumored to have attended meetings in the 1930s. The questions are not aggressive. They are patient. And patient questions are more dangerous. He answers carefully, truthfully. He distances himself where he can, clarifies timelines, offers nothing speculative. The agents take notes. At one point, one of them says, almost kindly, "You understand how humor can be misinterpreted in certain environments." He nods. He understands now. The interview lasts less than an hour. When it ends, they shake hands. No charges, no threats. But as he steps back into the California sunlight, he feels different. Documented. He does not know what the file says, he never will, but he knows it exists. A folder somewhere with his name typed neatly across the tab. That knowledge follows him. By the mid-1950s, the industry has fully adapted to the new reality. Publicly, it celebrates patriotism, privately, it tracks reputations. He continues to write, but his ambition has narrowed. He avoids controversial themes. He steers clear of scripts that question authority too directly. He removes subtext that might be misread. He tells himself it is maturity. But late at night, he recognizes it as fear. Not fear of prison, fear of erasure. Hollywood does not need to jail you to silence you, it only needs to stop calling. Years pass. Hoover remains director of the FBI, his influence expands, presidents come and go, the files grow thicker. The screenwriter's career stabilizes at a modest level. He never breaks into the top tier, never wins major awards, never becomes the voice of a generation the way some of his contemporaries do. He attends smaller gatherings now, less risk, less proximity to power. And whenever someone does an impression of a producer, a politician, a critic, he feels his body tighten instinctively. He laughs, but he does not join in. Because he has learned the cost of being amusing in the wrong room. Decades later, after Hoover's death in 1972, fragments of information about the FBI's files begin to surface publicly. Journalists uncover surveillance practices, politicians admit to private warnings. The country seems surprised. He is not. He sits in his living room, older now, watching a television report about Hoover's secret dossiers. The commentator speaks about leverage, about reputations managed through implication rather than accusation. He thinks back to the Polo Lounge, to the smoke, to the moment the laughter stopped. He realizes something that unsettles him more than the consequences that followed. Hoover did not need to punish him directly. The power of that silence reshaped the room instantly. It turned friends into cautious colleagues. It turned a promising career into a careful one. It transformed a joke into a permanent recalibration. All without a single public reprimand. He wonders how many others had similar moments, small interactions that redirected entire lives. Not through confrontation. Through observation. He never tells the story publicly, not in interviews, not in memoirs, there is no headline about it, no scandal. Because on paper nothing happened. He was never blacklisted. Never indicted. Never formally accused. His career never officially collapsed. It simply plateaued. And in Hollywood, plateau can be a polite word for containment. In the final years of his life, he occasionally drives past the Beverly Hills Hotel. The Polo Lounge still glows warmly in the evenings. New executives sit at tables where older deals were made. No one in those rooms remembers that specific dinner. No one remembers the imitation. But he does. He remembers the pause before Hoover spoke. He remembers the exact texture of the handshake. He remembers the sentence. I do hope your talents are always used wisely. At the time, it sounded like advice. Now he understands it was a boundary. A line drawn without raising a voice. The terrifying part was never that Hoover might explode. It was that he didn't. Power that shouts can be challenged. Power that simply watches changes behavior. That night in the late 1940s, in a room filled with some of the most influential men in Hollywood, a single joke revealed the architecture of fear. Not through punishment. Through silence. And once you understand that silence, you begin to hear it everywhere. In meetings. In interviews. In the careful way people choose what not to say. The story never made headlines. There was no dramatic downfall. Just a quiet adjustment that lasted a lifetime. And that is how real power often works. Not by destroying you in public, but by teaching you once exactly where the line is. And trusting that you will never cross it again.